You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast, and my guest is Damien Blenkinsopp. He's a founder of Keto Source. The website is ketosource.co, and he also runs the Quantified Body Podcast. Very knowledgeable guy. I met him at the Metabolic Health Summit recently, and I saw that he had a continuous glucose monitor stuck to his arm, so he inspired me to get one for myself and my family, and great guy with a lot of info. So, Damien, thanks for coming.
Oh, great to be here. Great to meet you too.
Yeah, excellent. So tell me about Keto Source. What was the reason that you founded it, and what's and the Quantified Body Podcast? Like, what's your background?
I guess it all comes from data because I was a analyst and a strategy consultant early in my career, and I've just always had a data bias and try to make decisions that way. And really, I was always interested in health, which is the focus of both of those projects. But what happened was my interest in that. I was originally interested in all of the longevity stuff. So, life extension and areas like that. Since my early 20s, I kind of felt like it was necessary to live as old as possible. So I was already interested in that and working on that. And then what happened is I was doing a digital nomad lifestyle, like a 4-hour work week, and I was living all over the place. And I was in Thailand at one point, and I got extremely ill. Acutely ill. We had floods there, and I also went to an island and got bit by something, and a whole bunch of stuff happened at the same time. And I was rushed to hospital, and they couldn't figure it out. A lot of neurological symptoms and all sorts of other symptoms. Actually, it was quite confusing because there was so much going on. Like, I was bouncing between experts in different departments, and so because that wasn't able to be fixed, it was confusing everyone. After a while, I stopped bouncing around the different departments, and I also ended up traveling to the US and places to try and find better medical help. But basically, I ended up just starting tracking a lot of data on my body to try and figure it out. And I spent 5-7 years basically digging myself out of that hole. All of those symptoms. At one point, I was bedbound, had a lot of neurological symptoms, had atrophy in my brain. So there's all sorts of things I've tracked over time, and the brain stuff's really, really quite frightening, especially when you've had a good brain. I was pretty smart, and I lost faculties that I took for granted. Like, I'd never spelled a word wrong in my life. My grammar, I speak many languages. So I was always really good with all that stuff, and I would be writing emails, and there would be huge mistakes, and I'd reread them, and there would be words in there that I didn't remember writing, and they didn't fit in the sentences, and very weird stuff. Wouldn't remember friends' names. There was all sorts of stuff going on, and you could see the atrophy in the brain also that was tracking with that. But anyway, so basically that forced me to spend a huge amount of time basically learning different things, testing different things, and just spending a lot of time and money on gathering data on my body to fix different things in my body and troubleshoot it and drag myself back to health. So part of that was the Quantified Body podcast. That was basically a project I founded to connect with experts, maybe, like you were doing yourself, something
That's
you enjoy.
True.
So,
yep.
Yeah. So, that enabled me to connect with a lot of cool people, scientists, or people who've done self-experiments as well. And I was doing it in a lot of areas that I felt could be helpful to recovering my health or exploring those areas. And the main focus was data because I found there was still a lot of opinion around, and at the beginning of when I got ill, it sent me around in circles. I got bounced between different departments in the hospital and things like that. And I didn't have a lot of data on the situation. They were, it was just kind of based on judgment. And so I ended up saying, look, I'm not doing anything unless I have data. And that came from my background as well. I've been a strategy analyst. So, when I was advising companies, everything was based on data. So it was just natural for me to fall back on that. And then the podcast was founded on that. And
my quick thing is, I realize, at least personally, and I'm sure you agree, you have to be a real advocate for your own health. You have to assemble all your own data and maybe talk to multiple doctors and piece it together, because otherwise, at best, it's like the blind men touching the elephant.
You always get second and third opinions. I mean, that's what I always tell my parents, my family, people like that. You can never rely on one opinion for anything. And then, like I say, like people making decisions in businesses and in other areas, when they're trying to be careful, they always get second, third opinions. Actually, I don't know if you know Ray Dalio. You read his books?
Yeah, he's great. He's really great.
Yeah. So he actually talks about a similar, a cancer diagnosis he got, and I think he went and got 4 different opinions, very, very different, very divergent, and he made a very different decision once he collected all the data from different places. So it's definitely something you have to do.
For one thing, with the medical world, I mean, I've had my own stuff. I guess, first of all, it's expensive to get different opinions. Second of all, there's all these silos. You want to know who's a good surgeon for X. Well, you call, and it's hard to, you usually can't even talk to the person. So how do you find out who's good and who's knowledgeable about X, Y, or Z? Then you got to pay him for the consult. Then if you need to get another biopsy or another MRI, for instance, who wants to do that? So the whole thing seems to conspire to make, getting multiple opinions and multiple tests in the medical world difficult, especially if you've got a serious condition. Then there's your mental state, the fear of, the results of the test. So kudos for you for doing that, but it just seems very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I had no choice. It was survival. So, I had a good standard of living, and I enjoyed a very good life. I traveled a lot. I'd done a lot of things I loved. And one of the ways I look at it, because there's other people that I know that have got dragged down similarly, but haven't managed to drag themselves back up. And part of it, I think, is that I was clinging to my previous standard of life, and I refused to give that up and accept something lesser. And I can be pretty damn stubborn. So that just meant I spent a hell of a lot of time, and I was very persistent, and I went through the opinions, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. I think you're also referring to that. There's a lot of bureaucracy you have to push through to get tests and all that stuff. It's not freely accessible information yet, but there are ways around that. Over time, you figure it out. And it gets easier and easier to get your labs. Like now I can just walk down the road and get labs, and then, I can talk directly with companies. And it gets easier once you've been around for a while and you know how it works. So, but
any tips for listeners on what they can do if they're in situations?
If you're in a situation where you need different opinions or you need different tests?
Yeah, both labs, opinions, etc. Any tips on how to make things, navigate the medical system more efficiently?
Yeah, well, there are self-serve companies now, depending on where you are based. They exist in the US. There's a few also in the UK. An even better way is to maybe set up you can make a friend who's a physician who can help you out. These were some of the hacks I, did early on. And you can work closely with one physician who's really bought into your problem and helping you solve it as well. So I've got some, close physician partners I've worked on throughout this period. And I bounce around to a lot of different specialists, because what I found is, you mentioned it, there's a lot of silos going on. The problem with everyone's mind is once we get into a topic, we start seeing it everywhere because you've spent so much time, you've invested so much time in that subject. So, I don't find any one person is going to solve all your problems. I feel like it's multifactorial. So I do, I just look for the best people in each area, and I keep going. I mean, that's one of the things I've done. I just kept on going. If something didn't work, I'd move on to the next thing and look at that. And I tried to work on different systems of the body, and get some kind of base data to understand where they are and if it's worth working on that for a while. I guess one of the big principles I also that helped me early on was I looked for physicians that had a lot of data and talked about it. So if you have physicians with very big practices, and they've seen a lot of people, and they like to test, they've likely, basically they're sitting on this pile of data, and if they're also kind of data orientated, they must have learned quite a bit from that. So I did also target people who were more data-driven and had large sets of data, I felt, so that, I could basically be leveraging that knowledge and that data that they'd built up over time.
How do you know if someone has a large repository of data or if they're data-driven? Do you look at their website, or how do you figure that out about a medical professional?
Well, you can see through their testing strategy. So some physicians will basically have a set of tests that everyone does when they join. So it's like a default. And then, a lot of the people I've ended up with are quite outspoken. They're at conferences. Sometimes they're presenting research, so they're involved that way. And, so those are the people I've been able to identify. If there's other good people and they're not as, visible, they've just got their practice and they're not showing it, I haven't found them, so I wouldn't know. But so I'm often coming across the people who will talk at conferences about their data. You often, if they're really interested in it, they'll often go to conferences and want to talk about it or even get involved in studies.
Okay. I kind of took you off track, but let's get back to Keto Source. So the podcast, I know you wanted to find experts and interview them. I do the same. But what is Keto Source about, and what was your reasoning for creating that?
So Keto Source is basically derived from the quantified body because if you look at my podcast, you'll see that I did quite a few experiments many years ago with fasting, in particular, different types of fasting diets, and so I did episodes on those because when I do an experiment and track labs and stuff, I'll publish it, and so it was a tool that I found to be very beneficial in various ways. The fasting cycles, FMD, or fast mimicking diet cycles, the fasting itself seemed to be quite beneficial. The ketogenic diet, I had a lot of inflammation. I was in a lot of pain. And when I switched to the ketogenic diet, that relieved a lot of that, and it helped with my brain symptoms as well. So basically, what happened is when I was searching for these tools, like the ketogenic diet and fasting, and this whole area of ketone metabolism became one of the best tools that I found. And so Keto Source naturally came out of that because I just saw it as something that could have great impact. At the time, there was research coming out. Dom D'Agostino was talking about it a lot. He was one of the guys I interviewed, Seyfried as well. But I returned to the UK. I'd been in the US, and there was nothing here. So I couldn't access even, the most basic keto supplements or the keto foods even. So the company basically got set up just because it was my interest. It was actually something I needed to function and manage my symptoms, and it just grew from there because there were so many people that were getting helped. When you have a keto company, and I talk a lot to my customers and my clients, and I built up a practice with PhD students, nutritionists, and PhDs now. Working in this field, and they're studying in this field, and we're working with clients, and you see the benefits to people, and so it's just something, it sucks you in because you're like, wow, this is something real that's really working for people, and it's great to work in a area like that. It's it's kind of like your dream, when you're if you're looking for a business, if you're looking for something you want to do, I mean, the sweet spot is something that you really feel like you're having an impact on the world.
Yeah, I feel like it was, meeting you helped me because you introduced me to the continuous glucose monitors and gave a lot of great tips. So it makes a lot of sense. Were you able to fix your condition or even put a name to the condition that you got in Thailand?
So, well, I think it's multifactorial. No, I mean, I don't, in a sense, I don't know if I still believe in the single condition idea because I've fixed so many different things and I've had gains along the way. I've had gains over the last year. I'm still improving. My brain is recovered. If I look at the latest brain reports I got, you get an MRI. It's called NeuroQuant. It's a benchmarking tool. See if there's atrophy in your brain. They use it for cognitive decline and things like that, and basically benchmarks you for age against healthy controls versus Alzheimer's versus mild cognitive decline. And mine's completely recovered. Which is quite fantastic over 4 years ago where, I'd mapped out the damage and the atrophy. I'm still working on it because there's still certain pains and other symptoms I get. And I don't know if I'll ever stop actually because it's really interesting as well. Just to, keep on exploring your body. I mean, your body is, something you live in all the time. And it's become a hobby for me as well. I mean, that's kind of what the quantified body is. I'm always doing experiments, looking at different things. And I do find that, I manage to optimize different things and it improves the quality of my life. So, whether it's sleep, whether it's energy levels, like I've had really big gains in energy levels the last year, and also like maintaining focus. So it has a lot of productivity impact, so I can work long days now. And, sometimes on Mondays, because I have a lot of meetings, I'll work 12, 14 hours and maybe 12 hours straight where it's nearly back-to-back meetings. And I feel like I can focus, which is definitely something that even before I got into trouble in Thailand, wasn't possible. In fact, I remember I used to zone out, and I wasn't like that at all, even though I was younger. So, no, I don't think it's something you let go of once you've learned a lot and you've learned to take control of your body. Once you learn to take control of your body and start improving it, I think it's something I'm going to be interested in for a while. And I'm still interested in all the life extension stuff. I don't know if you've got into that part, but I go to the conferences there, and I do believe that the technologies are going to be coming along pretty soon, which are going to enable us to extend our lives. So that's still an interest area for me.
Well, you put out a lot of interesting partial answers so far. So what are some examples of things you've done to improve your brain function that you felt worked? And then maybe we'll talk about some life extension stuff. Like I know there's way too many things to cover, but what are some things you've done that really made a big difference to yourself?
Yeah, so this bit's tricky because I mapped that improvement in my brain over 4 years, and I wasn't in a position where I could do one thing, a control, and then not do anything, and then get my brain scan. I was in a place where I need my brain back, and I want to feel great. So I've just done a lot of things, but I can tell you, like, theoretically, anecdotally, where I feel the gains have been. But so the ketogenic diet and the fasting cycles are periods where I noticed, the gains. And I still notice if I go off a ketogenic diet, I don't, but now and again, for a day or something, I have lower energy. I just don't feel as good, and I get more inflammation. So that's definitely key for me. But I don't know if that would be the same for everyone, because not everyone has the same inflammation as I do. Something else which I've been doing.
A good short disclaimer is, you're not a clinical trial and you're just one person, and I understand that. So
yeah,
as a disclaimer to listeners, and there's factors can influence other factors, but still, it's we'd like to hear and see what you have to say, what you experienced.
Yeah, exactly. And there is some some research studies looking at the anti-inflammatory mechanisms. There's no human studies or anything, but it's an interesting area of research. So I tell people to, if they're interested in it, you could like test the ketogenic diet. So this is often what we do with clients. You say, look, it's an experiment. And what you should do is raise your ketone levels above 3, maybe above 4, to get a clear signal, and do that for a couple of weeks and see if it's affecting your inflammation positively. It really is an experiment. And then you go off completely, go back on a carb diet, and then have a diary and make notes and see if you notice a difference. That's where we are. It's not a clear science, but, sometimes it's on-off approach. Like do it for 2 weeks, stop it for 2 weeks, do it again for 2 weeks, and keep a diary. Can give you a clear signal, indicator whether something's useful to you or not. So the thing I've done over the last year is sauna, dry sauna. So it's basically just sweating. So I've been going like maybe 5 times a week on average, and I've tracked how much I've sweated out. So it's about 100 liters now. Over
you
that
haven't
period.
collected the sweat in like bottles, have you?
So do you know what they did in the studies? I mean, what you have to do, like whenever you want to figure something like this out, you look at the studies and what they did, and they put you in big plastic bags, to collect all the sweat, so that they can weigh it. The other way they did it, and I found another study which is far simpler, is that you just weigh yourself before you go in, and then you weigh yourself afterwards, and there's a difference.
Better,
yeah, it's way simpler. So I was like, phew, that's feasible. So I've been able to do that the whole time. It's just interesting, but it varies as well. That's kind of interesting. I think it seems to anecdotally vary with stress. So when I'm more stressed and sleep deprived, I seem to sweat less. But it's just something interesting.
What are the effects on you from the sauna?
I seem to have had really good energy gain. So I went and saw my physician last month. He's in California, so I don't see him that often. So I hadn't caught up with him for a while, and we discussed this. I discussed the sauna project with him, and we'd run through it. And he'd actually had a few of his patients who had done kind of intense sauna for a while, and had seen some upside to it. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to do this test. And actually, there's a course I looked into, because there's a lot of fluffy stuff about saunas as well out there. But there's a guy called Brian Walsh. I don't know if you've come across him. But he likes to read a lot of research and create courses for physicians. So I see him at conferences quite a bit. So I went through his course, and it's nice because he's looking at real research papers and evidence for metals coming out in the sweat, for pesticides coming out in the sweat, and then talking about these things are in our body. What could they potentially be doing? At what levels do we have them? So I don't know why, but I have over the last year, and my physician noticed, the clear difference in not my labs, but we do pre-screen surveys. There are scientifically validated surveys you can do just on where you are. And so every time I go to see him, he has me take those, and there was a really clear difference from the last time I saw him a year ago. And I'm feeling much better, So I think sauna's got something. And I've noticed also that I seem to be more creative when I'm in there. So I read and take notes in there. So it's kind of productive time for me anyway, which is why I enjoy it, because it's like space. Like it's the one time I get to spend some time on my own. So I guess, I've been able to combine it like that. But I do find I come out with a better mood. And if you look at Rhonda Patrick's, she's big into saunas as well, from Found My Fitness podcast. And she's done some really, quite detailed episodes on it, and linked to studies and stuff. So there's some interesting stuff around there about mood and other things. So I seem to have experienced that as well.
Well, quick question on the pre-screening or the tests. Any markers of yours that particularly changed a lot?
Yeah, so I tried to do as many. For me, it's an experiment. So I tried to do a lot, but it's very hard to track things like metals and stuff in your body, because if you're looking at urine, that's basically an output. So say one of your detoxification systems, so you have different phases and enzymes, and these are all helping to convert things to allow them to get flushed out of your body. Now, if those are not working properly, you're going to have low amounts, and then some people are going to say, oh, you don't have a lot in your urine, so you don't have a lot in your body. Or you don't have a lot in your blood, so you don't have a lot in your body. But it depends on where it gets stuck, potentially, right? So the most interesting one I got was a fat biopsy, because you're trying to get at the actual burden, which is tissues, cells. So I had just a fat biopsy. It was the best thing I could find. And I halved my volatile organic compounds over that 9-month period. So I felt that was that's not a bad result. Now I've done the urine and the other tests, and I don't know. I'm going to actually have to dig into the data and stuff, but I don't, because of the detoxification issues and basically the variables involved in that, I'm not so kind of interested in it. I've also got some data. I was on a ketogenic diet and then I did a carb diet for one day and did some more urine tests, because one of my hypotheses is that when you're on a ketogenic diet or you're fasting, you've got lipolysis taking place, and you're breaking down fat cells and you're releasing some of these toxins, right? It could be metals, pesticides, because I'm on a fat soluble. But if you're on a carb diet, they're not getting broken down as much. So, again, that's a potential confounder. So it's just interesting stuff. I got to look for the data and see. But the only thing as I say, I think the fat biopsy is the only real thing that's a little bit useful.
Yeah, that's weird. A lot of people talk about the ketogenic diet being protective of various things. Let's say when you get chemo or radiation, et cetera. I wonder, based on your theory, if a carb diet for a day or two would be protective after doing an intense sauna period. You've liberated a lot of stuff out of your body. Maybe you want it to be quiet for a little while in terms of what the fat holds. So maybe you go on a carb diet for a few days to actually protect yourself and give you respite from what's come out of you, and then go back to a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, potentially. And I think, some people who maybe go on a ketogenic diet or they do a fast and they get ill, because we're talking to populations which are on keto diets and fasting, doing lots of fasting and stuff. We hear we get these people who can't fast or, who have problems with the ketogenic diet. And potentially, they've got some fat-soluble toxins that they've got stored up in their high levels and, releases a lot when they go on the diet. It's just, I think the body is so complicated. These are the interesting things, the questions, but how do you answer them? I don't know. We're not there yet.
Maybe that's where the keto flu comes from for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the headaches. I thought in particular about the headaches and stuff. People get more, and the people get these itches and stuff on their skin. Those kind of symptoms. They seem more, representative of toxicity sometimes.
What kind of experimentation have you done with exogenous ketones? I've spoken to a lot of people about them, but I don't know. People seem shy about saying much about them. What they've done and what they've experimented with.
Yeah. So my company's done a lot of experimenting with them. We've written up research on it because we were interested in understanding the esters versus the salts versus the C8, and basically understanding the ketone boosting effects of those. Just to kind of lay that out. So I've done a lot of that in the past as well. So the salts and the esters go up quick and they come down quicker. The C8's really slow to go up and it's slow to go down. So they're different profiles from that perspective. And this is anecdotal, but what the two things I use for the ketone salts for, and specifically I use Ketocana just because that one has worked historically for me, and so I just stick to it. And there was a few studies at the beginning at least done on that one. Versus some of the others which you don't really know where they come from as well. So the Ketocana for me seems to help to suppress inflammation as well, but I don't really know how it may be doing it. It's just an interesting thing. Like I've been in situations where I've had higher inflammation and I've taken it and it seemed to help suppress. There's the racemic argument about the ketone salts. That they have two sides and one's not getting metabolized properly. Well, maybe the other one's doing something, or maybe it's the salt content in there that is somehow doing something to my body. But I don't know. But I carry Ketocana around with me, and if I have one of these these times where I'm more inflamed, and it can get triggered by jet lag, lack of sleep and other things like that. I keep it around because it helps. And at first I wasn't sure.
How do you tell if you're inflamed? Is it a feeling? Do you feel bloated, or you just how do you know?
No. For me, I've like burning all up my spine. So it can get more than that. So it's pain for me. So it's quite noticeable. I can get pain in my hands as well. So it's quite a clear signal for me. I know for other people it's a little bit more subtle.
Yeah, when I spoke to Dom D'Agostino, he said one thing, possibly to try is, have ketone salts and then also have MCT oil, the C8, mix them together so you change the profile of absorption so it may last you longer, is one suggestion.
Yeah, so I do that all the time, actually. So that's kind of my preferred route. And also it gives you this like longer profile, like I was saying, the C8 lasts longer. So yeah.
But have you run across people, let's say that have have ketones or ketones plus C8 mixture before every meal or after every meal, or what kind of experiments do you see out there with exogenous ketones, and what kind of anecdotal reports do you hear?
I was just talking to a guy earlier who's tested using them before sleep because he's having sleep issues. They didn't seem to help. They seem to do the opposite, and I've actually got quite a few data points from that. So, if taking ketone salts before you go to sleep doesn't seem to be a good idea. And for some people also, not everyone, C8 late at night isn't helpful either. It'll keep you awake. So those are 2 points. And there's some people out there saying, like maybe ketone esters can be helpful to sleep. I don't know, right? I haven't tried that. I took a ketone ester on the plane on the way back from my Metabolic Health Summit just for fun with my team. We were like, well, let's do. I fell asleep the whole way and I had a great sleep. So I don't know, but I was really beat. I mean, it was a busy conference, right? So, I don't think it's correlated. I think it's just, I don't know.
Okay. What other areas of experimentation do you have interesting anecdotes? Maybe fasting schedules, hyperbaric oxygen. I feel like you know a little bit about everything. That's just my guess. So that's why I ask.
Yeah, because I've basically tried a lot of different things. I did hyperbaric for 3 months, maybe 4 months actually. So it's one of these soft chambers because you can have it in your house, so it's like really convenient. You can just sit in there twice a day. You can work, So that, I mean, often the accessibility makes a difference to using something. If I had to go to a hyperbaric, chamber down the road, I wouldn't do it. The reason I go to dry sauna is because it's basically downstairs in a gym. So I always think about convenience for these things. That's what really makes it work. So you can, if it's not a habit, it's not going to change your life, right? If you're not doing it every day, or if you're not doing it consistently, like hardly any of these things are going to have much of an impact. Now the hyperbaric, I don't feel like it had a very big impact. I was tracking some markers. I don't know if they were the right ones now, looking back at it. I've spoken a bit with a guy called Scott Scher. Actually, I spoke to him at the Metabolic Health Summit. I interviewed him there, but I've known him for a while. I've consulted with him talking about it. And, for me, I don't think it was the right thing. Might be beneficial, in specific scenarios. There's a fair bit of research, but for me, didn't really seem to do anything. So, and it's quite expensive.
Okay.
So that wasn't, a great use of time, I think, ultimately.
You mentioned fasting cycles. Intermittent fasting is pretty hot. Did you find that you would do it for 24 hours, 16 hours? I mean, what did you experiment with, and what kind of effects did you see?
So I'm more into the prolonged fast. I did intermittent fasting many, many years ago. For me, I did find it hard to maintain my weight with intermittent fasting because of the small eating window, and I would get really full. So that was just me. But prolonged fasts, done the water fasts up to 10 days, and then I started doing the fast mimicking diet, which I now prefer because I feel like me and everyone else. So I get my mom actually to do the fast mimicking diet, and most people, like if people come to us and they want to do fast, we normally say, look, like frankly, we think you get the same benefits from the fast mimicking diet, and it's slightly less stressful. And given that, well, a lot of these people also are like they tend to be doing a lot as well. So maybe they're not sleeping great. Maybe they're trying to work out a lot. Maybe they've got a busy life. Maybe they've got kids. So I think everyone's, got reasonable levels of stress these days. So I just think it's better to do the fast mimicking diet. I've tracked the markers and stuff, and I feel like it's pretty close to the same effects you're getting with a fast. So I think it's better to do that personally. And so I do that sometimes for 5 days, but I just do a more convenient version for me and a dumbed down one. So I just looked at the macros that he's using, and I just eat guacamole twice a day, and take a micronutrient powder to get a broad spectrum of micronutrients, and I'll just eat that, the 5 days to keep it simple.
You make it sound easy, but have you seen
what's easier?
Is very difficult for people, or?
Yeah, it
well,
is.
Any testing at all seems pretty hard, but what's your experience with how people do it successfully?
Well, I find that the psychological battle is the hardest part, and then they get if they haven't been on a ketogenic diet, like I would actually recommend someone do a ketogenic diet first, because the symptoms you get seem to be a lot lesser. Because like the people I know who've had the worst symptoms tend to have not done a ketogenic diet or any intermittent fasting or anything, and then they they talk about you. They'll tell you they're having dreams about food and they've got headaches. I think sometimes, quite often, the headaches are actually due to caffeine withdrawal if you've stopped that at the same time, if you stop coffee. But, they tend to talk about it in a much more extreme way and have a rougher experience, whereas the keto people, seem to get through it a lot easily. I've tracked, like, in the experiments, metabolic flexibility increasing with each fast. So basically you flip into ketones quicker. So, like when I first started, I think it was like day 3, my ketones spiked and really got into the high range over 5. But that basically, with each fast, it moved back to the front of the fast. So by the end, it was like 1.5 days or something. I'm already getting a big spike. So you can imagine, right? Basically, ketones are energy. Your body's, kicking up that energy. It's accessible then, and then you find that the fast is quite comfortable. It's quite easy to do. So I think it gets easier the more you do it. But really, for most people, it's a psychological battle of just this idea of not eating. That I think they just don't want to do it, and they've heard stories in the media or on the internet and stuff. And even my mom, she's around me a lot. she's done quite a few of the fast smoking diets now. She's still really resistant, especially when she reads something about it or something like that. So I think that's like where most people are. There's still a psychological fear of it.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I feel the same thing too. It's you feel afraid like you're gonna hurt yourself or do something wrong.
Well, and it also feels where like your legs kind of feel like you have slightly less control over them. So the first time I was careful I wouldn't walk too far from my house and stuff. I was kind of taking it easy. But then the last 10-day water fast I did, I went all around town. I worked, I did everything because but you feel like your legs are just a little bit more wobbly. You haven't as much control over them. You have to think a little bit more about where you're walking and things like that. So it's kind of an amusing sensation, like an adventure as well. Once you realize it's not dangerous, I think it's kind of interesting, and maybe worth experiencing at least once.
Well, the weird thing is too is there's so much time spent on looking for food, going to eat food, etc. I mean, you tend to have so much free time, you kind of don't know what to do with yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's actually great for working. I've found, like, if you got a lot of work on, and I find I've mentioned this before, like when you fast, you do slow down. So I've tracked markers in hormones and stuff. Your testosterone crashes, things like that, and you definitely feel like very different. I remember one time I was like, basically talking to a girl, like, thinking, like, kind of pursuing her a bit, and I did a fast, and then my interest just vanished after like day 2, and I stopped texting so much, and became more meditative and kind of long-term thinking. And I often find that when I'm fasting, I'm more interested in reading, got more time for reading, just everything kind of slows down a bit. And sometimes I think it's worth doing once in a while because we're rushing around all the time, and sometimes we're not thinking about our lives and where we're going and what's important. And a fast, I think, can be a way to get to the other side, and think a little bit more slowly and get a different perspective. So it's kind of like a nice contrast.
That makes sense. So, I've been asking about all these experiments, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about KetoSource because, I've already sucked up so much time. We're getting close to the end. What are the main things that KetoSource provides, and then what's on the roster for like the coming year? What are you going to be doing with KetoSource?
So I think you saw at the conference, we were at the conference with an idea which was keto experiments. So what we've been doing is the people have a ton of questions about keto, and it's getting bigger, right, every year. And there's a lot of practical questions. It could be like, it's things like, what alcohol should I take? Or it's like, the exogenous ketones, like, what are they actually doing to my body? When should I take them? What does research say? We've been doing reviews of research to kind of get some ideas on what practical suggestions might be for people. And then what we do is we do experiments to try and clarify some of the bits. And they're not like large experiments, but we have an internal team, and they'll do experiments N equals 2, 3. And then we've got a community here in London, and we did an experiment in December where, like, we tested 10 people live, and it was kind of like an event. So we're exploring this topic to try and bring more clarity to some of the topics which are more practical. We're interested in publishing studies around it. We learn a lot from it. So we're learning a lot about ketone metabolism. We're learning a lot about what foods are ketogenic versus not. And I think we need to do a lot more work there to understand that, because it's personal for people. It's different. We see variation when we're testing people, and we also see variation based on the simple guidelines of macros and things like that. And there are studies, and there's work on this as well. If you saw the continuous glucose monitor work by the Segal, Aaron Segal, a few years back, I interviewed him on my podcast, and they were looking at different people and the responses they had to different foods, and they were different. And so they started looking at the microbiome. That was their thing, and they differentiated people based on the microbiome, right? So that's one interesting variable. I'm sure we think there's many others. We definitely, I've had statistically significant results with sleep. So you can eat a food and it can be ketogenic. And if you are sleep deprived, it won't be ketogenic, which is interesting. I don't know why, but we've seen that enough. And I ran it in 31 people about a couple of years back. with a bar that I developed, which is ketogenic. It's been tested so much. But with the sleep-deprived people, they would get a slight bump in glucose and a slight decrease in ketones, where everyone else is getting the opposite. So I don't know if that's glucose dysregulation, what's going on there, but it kind of makes you. So this has made us focus more on sleep. When we're talking with clients and with people in general, we're like, okay, so you're having trouble with your keto diet. How's your sleep? And I think it's a really important piece. And obviously, it's always the piece people don't want to work on, the sleep, or that they got more resistance to. Unfortunately, it seems to be really, really important. So that's one of the this is the kind of stuff we're working on, and we're really interested in starting to publish research studies. I have PhD students and PhD, so they're interested in publishing more of this and getting more of it out there. So that's one of the things we're really focused on. And that's why we went to when we went to Metabolic Health Summit. That was the main thing we were doing there. I have products in the business as well. It all kind of goes together. I just try to develop the best, most ketogenic products that I can, so that people can get the benefits of ketone metabolism. So we do when we have a product, we just do a lot of testing with it to make sure it does what it says it's going to do.
Well, that's great. So we're kind of at the end of time. What are some resources for listeners? It sounds like your podcast, which I don't mind recommending people to, because anyone listening to this is going to be an information gatherer big time. So the name of your podcast again, where people can find it. What's that? Yeah,
the Quantified Body, which is at thequantifiedbody.net, or it's on iTunes, The Quantified Body.
Okay, and then ketosource.co is the website for all other KetoSource referrals. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. I mean, there's so much more to ask you, but we're out of time. But I think this is a good start. So, Damien, I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for the time. It's been great talking to you.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.